This morning, new legislation to be filed this week that will have people talking, tightening election laws in Texas, an anti-abortion bill, and holding Twitter and Facebook accountable if you get kicked off. State Senator Brian Hughes from East Texas is behind them, and he is on the program with us. In D.C., Trump's impeachment trial begins, a compromise on stimulus, and a quiet plan to make the U.S. Postal Service profitable. We'll talk to Congressman Colin Allred from the U.S. Capitol. Texas Republicans did not defend Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, but they didn't want her punished either. What that says about the future of the GOP. And Austin voters will go to the polls again this spring to decide whether to ban homeless camping in public spaces. We'll ask Austin's Mayor Steve Adler what he expects voters will do.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Let's begin this week with the top political headlines here in Texas. Governor Abbott unveiled what he wants the legislature to consider as emergencies. In his State of the State address, Abbott said he wants state lawmakers to punish cities that defund police. Abbott also wants to make changes to how judges grant bail, plus ensure what he described as election integrity and more. We're going to dive deeper into all of that a little later here in our program. The Republican Party of Texas fired a field organizer over social media posts that man made at the U.S. Capitol last month. The Texas Tribune first reported this one. The field organizer reportedly posted in support of the Proud Boys and conspiracy theories. After losing his job, he now says his own party is trying to cancel him. And a new poll shows that 83% of Texas Republicans believe there was widespread election fraud in November, despite any evidence of it. The University of Houston conducted the survey. That's the line Donald Trump argued, but courts across the country and even Trump's own administration said it just did not happen. We have to begin this morning in Washington, D.C. This week, the second impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump begins in the Senate. We're hearing from a lot of you also interested in what's happening with the next stimulus bill. And there's something else in D.C. that caught our eye, a lesser known piece of legislation, bipartisan, that would make the U.S. Postal Service profitable. To talk about all of it here, we called Congressman Colin Allred, a Dallas Democrat, there at the U.S. Capitol. Congressman, good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
You joined a bipartisan group from the House and the Senate to reintroduce the U.S. Postal Service Fairness Act. Why is this so necessary?
You know, the U.S. Postal Service has been under requirement since 2007 to pre-fund their retirement benefits for 75 years. It costs them around $5 billion a year, and no other agency is required to do that. And that's caused the Postal Service to have real financial problems. And in fact, they're going to run out of money by 2024. So our bipartisan, bicameral bill would remove this requirement, allow them to pay for benefits as they go, and would allow the Postal Service to invest in operations and technology and to do a better job of delivering the mail that we all rely on.
Yeah. And so if this passes, does this mean suddenly the Postal Service will be flush with cash?
Well, actually, they would be profitable. It's amazing that this is the only reason the Postal Service is not. In fact, we had to bail out the Postal Service last year because of some of the issues they were having with funding, and particularly during a pandemic. I think we're all understanding just how much we rely on the mail. I mean, the Postal Service delivers your packages. Of course, they allow you to stay in touch with your friends and family. For our veterans, 80% of them get their medication to the mail. Our seniors are relying on their checks coming in the mail and their medication in the mail. And so this is a critical service and one that I think benefits everyone.
Let me ask you about the stimulus bill. President Biden seems open to $1,400 payments. Compromise is significant.
Absolutely. I think that President Biden has said that while he wants to make sure that these payments go out, he's willing to negotiate in terms of the targeting of who receives it. And of course, I think he's not married to any dollar figure in terms of the overall package. I think he's trying as hard as he can to be reasonable, to attract bipartisan support for this. But either way, we're going to pass legislation that's going to help our North Texans and Americans get through this crisis, because a lot of the benefits that we put in place in the CARES Acts are going to be expiring next month, and they have to be extended.
Congressman, I want to ask you about the state of Congress today. The last time we talked to you, you said that the situation was still pretty raw up there after the pro-Trump mob ransacked the Capitol on January the 6th. Members of Congress now who skipped the metal detectors going into the House chambers are charged $5,000 for a fine for, skipping it for the first time, $10,000 for the second time. There's a situation with Marjorie Taylor Greene as well. How has the situation changed? Has it improved? What does it feel like today?
Well, I think it depends on, the committee you're on and who you're working with. I just got off of a foreign affairs bipartisan committee hearing that I thought was quite productive. And I think there's still a lot of folks here who recognize that we need to work together. But certainly we are facing, one of the greatest attacks on our democracy in our history. So there has to be accountability. I think that is a part of healing. For you to move forward, you have to have the folks who are responsible held accountable. But we all, I think, also recognize that we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're in the midst of an economic crisis, that we have real and serious challenges facing us that we have to address. And we're going to continue to try to do that as well.
I want to ask about the impeachment. 17 Republicans would have to join Democrats in the Senate in order to get a conviction over there. There doesn't seem to be support in the Republican caucus to actually do that. Is a conviction really necessary at this point?
Well, listen, the House does its duty in terms of passing the impeachment resolution and sending it to the Senate for trial there. And I would expect that the United States Senate would follow its duty and conduct a fair trial and have a fair outcome. But this is an important part of accountability. The President of the United States assembled this mob and lit the flame of the attack. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House. And there has to be accountability for that. There is no January exception to impeachment, that if you do it in January, if you try to overthrow a government or have a coup in January, that you can't be impeached. That would make the end of any presidency a period in which anything could happen. I don't think that is the route we want to go down. But it's also important because a conviction would prevent the president from running for re-election or ever holding federal office again. That's one of the most important aspects of the impeachment power. And I think that is something that's also appropriate here.
All right. Congressman Colin Allred, good to see you again.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Of course, another major issue we face is COVID. First responders and the elderly were first in line for the vaccine. The rollout still having issues with all those long lines, but unbeknownst to many people, the state of Texas is also sending the vaccine to prisons. Infection rates there have been high, so why aren't inmates there getting shots? The Texas Tribune has been trying to answer that question in its reporting, and with us from Austin is Ross Ramsey, the co-founder and executive editor of the Trib. Good morning to you, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was quite surprised that prisoners were ahead of the public, folks like you and me. Nevertheless, though, the prison system has 9,000 doses. Why aren't inmates getting these doses?
The infection rates are much higher in dense populations. This has been the problem in long-term care centers. It's been the problem in prisons. It's been the problem in some factories. I guess the first idea in prisons was that you ought to inoculate the people or vaccinate the people who are going in and out, the guards who go home every day, and so you don't get it in the population. But it's still spreading really, really rapidly within the prisons, and a lot of states have moved prisoners into the high priority vaccination lines.
Tell us about John Cornyn separately. He's working with business groups, a new business group, trying to get a permanent solution for Dreamers.
Right. These are the kids who were brought over illegally when they were kids and raised here. One of the lines when they were talking about this was that these kids were raised with our kids. Right. And they've been in sort of a legal limbo for a long, long time as the Congress tries to figure out something on immigration. These business groups and Cornyn have tried to pick them off and just say, let's take this group and try to solve this problem, even if we don't solve the bigger one.
Well, we shall see. Fingers crossed to them. Ross, back in a moment. Coming up, tightening election laws in Texas, an anti-abortion bill, and holding Twitter and Facebook accountable if they kick you off their sites. These bills are going to be talkers when they are filed this week. Their author is State Senator Brian Hughes. He's with us in a moment. And the homeless camps in Austin are going before voters this spring. One of the topics we'll discuss with Austin's Mayor Steve Adler in just a moment. There is a new sheriff in town. Voters in Fort Bend County, just southwest of Houston, did something that hasn't been done in 150 years. They elected a black sheriff. The first and last black sheriff here was 1869, just after Reconstruction. Eric Fagan there was sworn in last month, and we got to know him on this latest episode of our Politics Political Podcast. What he thinks about Black Lives Matter and about defunding police and a lot more. If your phone is handy, you can get this episode right now. Just turn your phone's camera on, aim it at the QR code there on your screen. It will take you directly to this latest episode. The podcast is called Politics. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Our next guest is likely to generate some headlines with bills he is filing this week. There's an anti-abortion bill, one addressing election security, and another that would hold Twitter and Facebook accountable if they kicked you off their sites. State Senator Brian Hughes is filing these this week. He's a Republican who represents the northeast corner of Texas, Tyler, Texarkana, and other places. We spoke with the senator from his office at the state capitol. Senator Hughes, good to see you this morning.
Good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, no doubt. Let's talk about some legislation you plan to file this week. You have a number of bills, but I want to ask you about a couple of them in particular. The first is the heartbeat bill. Give us an idea of what this legislation, when it is filed, will contain.
This is about protecting the unborn baby in her mother's womb. There's a lot of talk about science, how we should follow science. We agree. Many states have already passed heartbeat bills. Texas is behind. And this bill will say when there's a heartbeat detectable, that little baby is going to be protected from abortion. So it's a straightforward bill. It makes sense. Texas is behind. We should have already passed this bill. So we're optimistic about getting it done.
And if my recollection is correct, these have come through the legislature before without any luck. Why do you think this time might be different?
It's interesting. We normally pass in Texas pro-life bills every session or so, but you're right. Last session, a heartbeat bill began in the House and it didn't get the traction it needed. So unusual. We did pass some pro-life bills, but I'm with you. I can't give you a specific reason why the heartbeat bill hasn't passed before. But we feel good about it this time. We're optimistic.
Another piece of legislation that you and your office are going to file this week is about big tech, censorship with Facebook, with Twitter, and things like that. What in the world can Texas do to impact big tech?
It's a great question. We filed a bill about this during the last session 2 years ago. It passed the Senate, did not make it through the House. So the bill we're getting ready to file will say that if a company discriminates against you, deplatforms you, blocks you, kicks you off based on your viewpoint, based on your politics, your religion, based on viewpoint discrimination, it'll give you a way to get back online.
And would it provide just an outlet for legal action by an individual or what?
Yes, that's exactly right. The bill we had last time looked at different options for bringing suit. What we would like to do is to give any Texan who's being discriminated against the option to bring in action. And we think that will get Facebook's attention, get Twitter's attention, and cause them to start treating Texans fairly.
You have a few other bills that you're working on immediately here, and I want to ask about two other ones. Election security. Yeah. That's a hot topic, and a lot of people have said this issue itself will be a controversial one. What's your plan?
We're talking about common sense reforms that say for those mail ballots, we're going to verify the signatures, make sure it really is the person who's voting. Also for poll watchers, the rules say they can be in the room, but we saw in some of those places like Detroit and Philadelphia where the poll watchers are in the room, but 100 feet away from what's happening. So they need to be in the room and able to meaningfully observe what's going on. So this is bipartisan stuff so that everybody's treated fairly and the watchers and observers from both parties can see what's going on.
Well, you mentioned a few other cities there too. We heard Governor Abbott and others after the November election say that Texas ran fine. Do you think Texas actually had any issues that this bill would correct?
No, we're thankful. A lot of the problems we saw in 2020, we haven't seen come to Texas yet, but we want to learn those lessons. Texas has overall a good system, but it needs some tweaks. It needs to be cleaned up. We've had testimony before the State Affairs Committee about organized voter fraud. We have over in my district, we have a sitting county commissioner and some other people under criminal indictment for voter fraud. We're talking about this has been investigated. The grand jury's returned the indictment. So this is very much a problem in Texas.
Yeah, to cleaning that issue up. Good deal. State Senator Brian Hughes, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Let's stay in Austin for a moment, but talk about the city of Austin. This spring, voters there will consider banning homeless camps in public spaces. Homelessness is a problem in every big city across our state, but one that Austin's Mayor Steve Adler is trying to work through there. He joins us now from Austin. Mayor, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Well, I want to ask about this going back on the ballot in May. How likely is it that the ordinance can survive?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the election. My hope is that voters aren't going to take us back to where we were before, because we know that that wasn't working and our homeless challenge was growing exponentially. At the same time, I drive around this city too and see the kinds of things that are concerning a lot of people. We have to have a third choice, which is not to go back to where we were and also not to maintain what we're doing. It's not working the way it needs to. My hope is that the community is really getting together, I think, in a large community summit here in February. Governments, nonprofits, faith groups, advocates, community solution, I think, is going to provide a third choice.
You don't sound too optimistic, though, about this challenge.
Well, I don't know how it'll turn out, but I know that the work we have to do is the same regardless of what happens with the election in May. If we have a camping ban and people go back to the woods, into the streams, they don't disappear, we still need to house them. Wherever they are, we still need to house them. So the work is the same.
Gotcha. I want to ask you about Governor Abbott listing as one of his emergency items that he wants to punish cities that defund police. You insist that that terminology is not appropriate for Austin, but the city there has removed a little more than $21 million from the police budget into mental health and other alternatives. But in the legislature, Republicans run it there. Do you expect that Austin's going to have to restore that money after this legislative session?
In this community, you just talked about homelessness. We took some of the money for unfunded police positions to be able to get people out of tents and off our streets and into motels. Our community wanted us to do that. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't know what will happen at the legislature, but this conversation, we just need to make sure that it actually relates to what's happening. For example, the city council last night took our crime lab, the forensic lab, and took it out of the reporting line for the police chief and put it so that it's an independent department in the city. We've had a huge problem with rape kit backups and problems in court. Keeping the same people, keeping the same budget, but now it's independent and reports to the city manager. Was that a defunding action? I don't think it was, but they all get lumped in with each other.
I understand rape kits are an issue in quite a few cities. Let's kind of zoom out for a moment. Rodeo Houston canceled again this year over in Houston. South by Southwest is online next month. Austin City Limits coming up in October. How confident are you that will be an in-person event?
I'm pretty confident that by October we're going to be able to do that in-person event. My sense is that with the increase in vaccines, I would be surprised as we're going into the summer that everybody who wants a vaccine hasn't had a chance to get it. So I think we're going to come out of this. There's a lot of work to do between now and then. Yeah. And I keep reminding my community to keep wearing your masks for right now. It's going to be a while still. But by this summer, I think we're going to be in a different place.
All right. Austin Mayor Steve Adler, stay healthy. We appreciate the time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Coming up, Governor Abbott's emergency legislation for lawmakers. What is this session going to be all about? We're going to discuss that coming up next on the Roundtable. Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Bernadine Steptoe, political producer at WFAA, here each week. We'll also start with you and Austin. Governor Abbott laid out his emergency items. What is this session, the legislative session, going to be about, do you think?
I think the first thing it's going to be about is COVID. He didn't have that as an emergency item, but the coronavirus was sort of an overlay on everything else. We're going to talk about broadband, which comes from COVID. We need broadband internet everywhere if we're going to do schools and business that way. I think we're going to talk about police and racial justice. He's more on the police end of that, but that's another thing that we'll be dealing with. And he wants some changes in election laws. The interesting thing there is everybody wants changes and everybody wants them from a different aspect.
Indeed so, Bud.
With some real small ball ideas. He didn't really have any big overreaching ideas, and that's because the legislature won't get much done this session. It's not safe for them to be in there all day, every day. They're not meeting very much. We just now got the House committees. I'm not going to say that's bad, but the legislature is just going to get a budget out, a few of the governor's priorities, and call it a day.
Bernadine?
I think that Bud and Ross are correct in terms of there's not a lot that's going to get done because Abbott is running for election. And most of the things that he's talking about are the things that he's going to run on for election, and you just don't have the time because they're going to have to go into redistricting as well.
Yeah, of course.
So,
Abbott is up next year to run for his third term.
Yes.
Ross, I want to ask you about D.C. Texas Republicans and members of Congress up there, they did not defend Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene with her conspiracy theories and supporting acts of violence against Democrats in Congress, but they didn't vote to punish her either. What does that suggest about the future of the GOP?
I think it suggests that the people in office don't yet know where their electorate's going to land. They don't know whether their constituents are going to land with Group A or Group B, and so they're taking care not to identify themselves too closely with one or the other.
But even after Trump, this is still kind of going on because they don't know where people are landing, right?
This was really the case before Trump. Republicans in primaries tended to vote for the strongest candidate who seemed like they'd fight the hardest. It really didn't matter whether it's based on facts. They were looking for a fighter, and so that's why they're reluctant to punish Greene.
Does that surprise you at all, Bernadine, what we saw happen a couple of days ago?
Absolutely not.
You sound confident in that.
Yes, because you're looking at the same thing that happened when the vote came down to impeach former President Trump. And then, as everyone is saying, the Republican Party doesn't know where it's headed. And so what it's doing is trying to just find its way through, and whether or not it's going to be those representatives like Representative Greene or the representatives such as Liz Cheney. They don't know where they're going.
Yeah.
So and then they're just letting everybody else define who they are.
There's a very clean break among inside the Republican Party right now. Guys, thanks so much. We appreciate that. Thank you for watching as well. Don't forget the second impeachment trial of former President Trump begins this week. We'll see you again next Sunday.